When the pandemic first hit our country back in March, we did see an immediate shutdown of schools and businesses. Now, in what looks like the beginning, potentially, of a second wave, some regions are going back to some of those restrictions. One doctor in our country, though, thinks that a pre-planned shutdown would be less disruptive and could be more beneficial long-term to stopping the spread. That doctor is Vincent Lam. He is a practicing physician, faculty member at the University of Toronto. Dr. Lam, good to see you again today, and thanks for taking the time.
Sure, glad to be here.
So talk to me about this idea of sort of a controlled shutdown and what that would look like and what it would mean potentially in your mind.
Sure. Well, this really comes out of the lessons that we've already learned. And the first lesson that we've learned is that a widespread shutdown actually works. And so from daily numbers that were just below about 2,000 in the spring, our widespread shutdown managed to bring the daily numbers down to sort of the 400 to 800 range. And now, as we've eased off with restrictions, the numbers have crept up again to a level where we're concerned near 1,000. So lesson one is that we know that widespread lockdowns actually work. The second lesson is that they're incredibly disruptive to people's lives and to the economy, and often in a way that's unfair because some people are able to be more resilient without advance notice than others. So here the idea is very simple. The idea is, look, let's use what we've learned. We know what works, but let's do it in a way such that it affects and impacts Canadians in a far reduced manner. Let's do it in a way that we give people time to prepare. We give people time to plan how their lives and how their businesses are going to work. And hopefully what we end up with is the benefits of a widespread shutdown, but without the costs of that being sudden and unplanned.
We read your piece in the Globe and Mail with much interest about this whole idea of sort of a more orderly form of a shutdown. How would that be different, let's say? Just give us a couple of examples from what was a really abrupt lockdown back in the spring.
Sure. Well, I think we all remember the toilet paper scramble, and there are probably people who now have a year's worth of toilet paper in their basements. And so it's pretty simple. If you know that the covatical, which is what I like to call it, would be 1 month, then you wouldn't buy a year's worth of toilet paper. You would buy, maybe 1 month absolute max. And so that may be a small and lighthearted example. But I think more seriously, what it would mean is that schools, for instance, could plan to send work home as needed. Hospitals would not have to cancel elective procedures because with a pre-planned reduction in activity, elective procedures would not have been scheduled. Businesses can plan their inventory accordingly. Consumers would modify their spending behavior. They would understand that their chance to shop and, for instance, stock up for Christmas would be just prior to the covatical. And the concept would very much be that it is the element of surprise and is the element of panic which causes as much of the harm and probably more harm than an actual reduction in activity. And one example I like to think about is I like to think about France. And anyone who's gone to France knows that basically France shuts down in August and you can't find a lot of things. And yet somehow the French economy doesn't collapse and the French stock market doesn't crash every summer. So what we would see is also that businesses would build this anticipation into their forecasts and their planning. We would also have to be very, very cognizant of those who are vulnerable and those who need the support of Canada and of Canadians in a broad way in order to be able to come through this period of planned shutdown, the covatical, with a minimal amount of disruption rather than the maximal amount which we experienced in this past spring.
Right. So COVID, sabbatical, you get covatical, and people take a break and they stay home. Yeah. Concerns about the economy. You touched on it a moment ago. People saying, "Oh gosh, that would, that would knock the Canadian economy on its behind once again, as we saw earlier. Businesses trying to get back to business. Would that put us backward? Can it be done properly and I guess feasibly?"
Absolutely. I hear those concerns, and those are absolutely crucial and legitimate concerns. And here's the scenario that I would hate to see. We have suffering retailers, we have businesses which are on the edge, and we have rising numbers. And I would hate to see an unplanned, sudden lockdown right before Christmas shopping season. I think for a lot of businesses, that would be a complete disaster. Now, if we know, for instance, that we're going to have a pre-planned reduction in activity from, say, the start of December to the start of January, then businesses would sell their Christmas goods. People would buy their Christmas goods in advance. And, it's a really interesting thing because in France, in August, the industrial production of France drops by a third, right? And this is understood to happen. And once again, the economy does not fall off a cliff. So, I know many people have really had a tough time both personally and economically. And I think that the massive advantage of being able to pre-plan a reduction in activity will be the advantage of being able to anticipate how to help people and businesses who will find themselves needing some help in this period.
Dr. Lam, we appreciate you taking some time to be part of the conversation and give us your suggestion on the idea of pre-planning a shutdown, a so-called COVID-atical. Thanks for this.
Thanks for having me.